Today is September 22nd, 2004, and my name is Stan Moretsky, and it's my pleasure to be interviewing Robert Benyas. All of his life, he's been behind the camera. Today, we've got him in front of the camera. So table's been turned on him. But as I was preparing for today's interview, I kept thinking how you were like a fly on the wall, Bob. That you've been at so many meetings and events, the things that you've seen and heard. And so after we talk about your history, your life, I want to hear about some of the juicy statements that you've heard, some of the events you've been at, kind of the Peyton Place of Detroit's Federation sort of a thing. But let's start at the beginning, and why don't you tell me your birth date, where you were born, and let's start talking about your family a little bit.
Okay. Well, I was born October 12th, 1923, and I happened to be born in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, my father was born in Michigan. My mother lived in Michigan. But my dad went out to Omaha for a job. I guess 23, it wasn't that easy to find a job. He worked, I'm not sure what he did, but he worked in Omaha. I was born, and then the family came back, and I went to school in Detroit. So I don't even remember Omaha. I was a baby, but I came back, and I went to the usual schools that Jewish kids went to, Roosevelt, Durfee, and Central. And then my family moved, and I had to graduate from Northwestern. But I was a photographer very early. Somebody gave me a camera, I don't know who, and I could take pictures. I didn't know what I was doing, but the pictures came out okay. And I was a professional because I sold them to neighbors. I photographed the babies on the block and sell them for a quarter, or whatever I could get, so I could buy, paper and chemistry and things like that. So I felt that I was a professional from the age of about 15, and now I'm 80 and going to be 81 pretty soon. So that's a long time to be a professional of anything. And then I took some pictures in high school, and then I went to Wayne University, and I did photography at Wayne. I was learning all the time, mainly by talking to other photographers. Or I didn't have any formal schooling. I just made pictures and looked at them, and if I didn't like them, I'd try to find out what's wrong. And people were very helpful. A lot of the guys on the news and the free press were very helpful to me when I was starting out, and I did a lot of photojournalism. And then I was drafted in the Army, and after basic training, I was lucky enough to be sent to photo school. I qualified for airplane mechanic, but they didn't want to send me to airplane mechanic. They sent me to photo school. So then I learned some technical things. I learned things I had no idea about, how film is made and things like that. But all the time I was a pretty decent photographer. And I have some of those early pictures, and they're okay. I still like them. And then after I graduated from the photo school, I was at Richmond Army Air Base, and I was a photographer there. And then I was sent overseas to India. I spent 2 years in India, and that was very fascinating. And I was a photographer. I traveled throughout India, and there was no combat. I didn't have to see combat. But it was mostly training missions that they had in India, where they were preparing people who were finishing up in Europe before they went to Japan. So there were training schools, and I was a photographer, and I did a lot of so-called public relations photography. And I was able to photograph a lot of India, and I made a nice album for myself, which I still have. And then after I was discharged, I came home for a little while, and I heard about a course in Chicago that was very prestigious. There were 10 world-famous photographers who were going to speak over a 5-week period, and they weren't just going to give a lecture. Each one was going to be there for 3 days. So I got to work with the greats. Ouija was the one that influenced me a lot. I don't know if you know Ouija, but he was a wonderful photographer in New York that captured murders and fires, and gave me a flair for watching what to photograph. Be alert and be ready to take pictures. And my first pictures that were published in Life magazine were pictures that I took of Ouija teaching us how to photograph a murder. And we took a dummy into it was in Chicago, and we took a dummy dressed up in a tuxedo, and we put him in the bushes, the whole class, about 25 of us, and then he showed us how he photographs a murder. And I photographed him, and my instructor sent them to Life magazine. They were published. So that was kind of neat to get published in Life magazine. Had about 3 pictures on a spread. And then there was a photographer there who was a Life staffer, who was probably my greatest influence. His name was Wayne Miller, and he was a Life photographer, and he allowed me to go with him on some assignments. And I probably learned my greatest lesson from him. There was a mine disaster in Illinois called Centralia, and he went there to photograph it, and I went with him. And it was terrible. People, guys were lost in the mine, women were crying, and I couldn't understand at that time how you could photograph all the terrible things that were going on. But he explained to me that that's their job, that it's important that people know about this, and you have to be calm, and you have to not, because I was practically crying, and you take pictures. So I learned a lot from Wayne Miller. And after I graduated, he put together the Family of Man show, which was a fantastic exhibit in New York at the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art. And we went. Unfortunately, I submitted pictures to it, but none of them were in there. And after I graduated from the Institute of Design, which was considered a very famous school at that time, the great artists came as lecturers. The head of the school was Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. There are pictures of his in the Art Institute here. And he brought in all his friends from Europe who were, after the war, had survived and came and spoke to us. Fantastic lecture with Buckminster Fuller. And I just stood there and listened with my mouth open and my eyes open. And this man was really something. And I was influenced by a lot of important people. I'll get to the most important person that influenced me pretty soon. But then after that, after I graduated, I was recruited for a job in Coldwater, Michigan. There was a factory there that photographed store displays and mannequins. And then I learned a lot about so-called still life, but these were big. This is a full-size mannequin or a chrome display. It was tough photography, but and I pretty much had to do it on my own. They didn't have a photographer. They used to get clippings from the manufacturers, and they wanted to do their own photography. So I learned a lot about that type of photography. But let me go back to Chicago. When I was photographing Ouija, I wanted to get a high angle. And there was a guy there that I didn't know, and I said, let me climb on your shoulder. I want to get a high angle. So he said, yeah, okay. Kind of a little bigger than me, a little strong. So he held my hand, I boosted it up, and I got that. And that's one of the pictures that ran in Life magazine. So we became friends. His name was Jack Kaufman. And we became friends. We started double dating, going out on dates and things like that. And nobody had any money, so what a date was, usually you went to somewhere where there was a meeting where they were giving out free pizza. That was a date. Now, we didn't know that a lot of those were probably communist or Wallace meetings or something like that, but we didn't care. We went there to eat and drink and find girls. But then I went to Coldwater, and I came back to Detroit. I was there almost a year. It was okay, but I knew that that's not what I wanted to do. So I came back to Detroit and started working out of my house. And I worked for Federation. They didn't have anybody. I worked for the United Way. They didn't have anybody doing what I was doing. I was 35 millimeter in those days. Everybody had a 4x5 speed graphic. It would take one picture. I could take 36. And nope, there wasn't anybody doing that. The newspaper guys were speed graphics. A few guys had Rolleiflexes, 2 1/4 pictures. I also had a Rolleiflex that I used maybe for cars.
You're talking about like the beginning of the 60s, late 50s?
No, I'm talking about early 50s.
Okay.
Early 50s. yeah, yeah. 49, 50. And then 51 comes the most important influence, who's sitting over in the corner there, Shirley Benyas. Interestingly enough, she lived on the same street I lived on, but we didn't know each other. We were both living on Pingree, but she was a block and a half away from me. But we met at a party, and right away we started dating and doing things. And I took her with me on some of my assignments, and Shirley was a singer and needed a picture for a headshot. And I took the picture and I delivered it. And I didn't want to take any money, but she paid me and I took the money. So we became friends after that. And it wasn't long after that that we became engaged and married in March of 51, and we're married 53 years. So Shirley's been a big influence on me. She's my best critic. Now let's see, where was I? Okay. Jack Kaufman, after he didn't want to continue his schooling in Chicago. He decided to go to California. There was a famous photographic school out there, mainly connected with Hollywood. And he thought maybe he could get into Hollywood. And he graduated, but he couldn't get a job. There was nepotism all over the place. You had to know somebody to even get a job. He was selling shoes. He came back a couple times and called me in Detroit, and we would go out. And then one time he called me, he says, I'm getting married, and I got married in California, but my bride's family is very upset. They want a wedding here. We're going to have a wedding in Detroit. Would you come? I said, of course I'll come, Jack. So I said, what are you doing, Jack? He said, well, I'm selling shoes. I can't get into photography. And I'm busier than hell. I'm got all kind of assignments. You know, the beginning of Sinai Hospital, and I was their photographer. And Federation kept me busy, and other charities. And I said, Jack, I'm so busy taking pictures. I'm working out in my basement. Why don't you come back and we'll start a business together? And he said, no, my wife loves California. So I happened to get so busy, I actually couldn't handle assignments. I sent him a telegram. About a week later, he comes back with his furniture and his wife, who wasn't too happy. See, but we opened up Benyas-Kaufman in February of 1951, and we found a store on Linwood near Grand Boulevard, which he thought was kind of close to everything. And the rent was, I remember, was $60 a month, and that included light and hot water, and it was big enough for a little studio, and we were fairly successful. You know, we built up a nice business, and about 59, we were growing. We were doing automotive, we were doing food, jewelry, fashion. We wanted to build a studio, and we built the building on 9 Mile Road at Rosewood. We found some land that was inexpensive, and it was perfect for our purpose, and we built what was considered the outstanding studio in Detroit. Small studio. It wasn't that big. And another interesting factor about the studio was we didn't have any money. How do you build a studio without money? Well, Eisenhower was in the administration, and the only Republican that did any good. You could get an SBA loan if you could do government photography. So we had to fill out a lot of forms that we could do government photography. And they want to know, could we photograph a tank? And we said, of course we can photograph a tank. He said, well, when you build a studio, you have to have a floor that's 8 foot thick of concrete, steel reinforced. And they gave us the money. They gave us $50,000. We paid it off in 10 years. And it was a low interest loan, small business investment. I don't think those exist anymore. But they really helped a lot of small businesses get started. Because we no way could we have, we had the money for the land. We bought the land. We bought 3 lots on 9 Mile Road. But we didn't have the money to build a studio. And we found a great architect who was working out of a tiny little room, and he was willing to design the plans if we would give him free rent for a year, which was okay with us. And his name was Sandy Rawson, and he was a very fine architect. Designed a lot of very nice buildings. Unfortunately, passed away a while ago. And the building was great, and everything was fine for a long time. And then, well, it came time to sell it. We did sell it. We got a good price for it, and we pretty much split up. We're still friends, but we split up the business. And I'm working as a freelancer, and I had a job today. I'm busy, and that's sort of the overall personal picture, except for the birth of our children and now grandchildren, which is the most important things. Shirley and I have been fairly healthy and lucky to be married all these years. And our friends are, we have a lot of friends that are married a long time. One divorce that we know of. But other than that, our friends are all married a long time. And the one thing that bothers me is that I always dealt with women. All the PR people, my whole career was women. I never had an affair. I said, there's got to be something wrong with me. I never had an affair. So, but again, you know, if you want to talk about my work, let's take a break and I'll get some water. Okay? Focus stuff. I earned these wrinkles. Well, what happened as I did my photography of the various agencies in Detroit, and almost every Jewish agency and a number of Christian agencies, Night Away, and I was also very proud of the fact that I was the official photographer of the League of Catholic Women for 10 years. They had a magazine, and I was their illustrator for their stories. And and that came about, let me tell you about that. That came about in an interesting way. When I came back to Detroit, I wanted to get national exposure, and I went to New York, and I called on editors to see if I could get some work from national magazines, and they directed me to a picture agency called Black Star, and they accepted me as their Michigan photographer, and I was their photographer for 50 years. And I had a lot of national and international assignments, just about everything you could think of, and I just received something that was extremely nice. About 25 years ago, I had photographed Joyce Carol Oates for her first book called Them. Last year, they republished 35 of her books, and they decided to use the photograph that I took of her, not on the back flap, but on the front cover with my name on it. Unbelievable. The whole front cover is Joyce Carol Oates and this big picture of her, and on the bottom it says, photo by Bob Benyas. And I got a nice check. I had to give permission to use it, which was fine, you know. So I did photograph a lot of well-known people, but what I'm trying to get to is that I got very interested in all these organizations, and I joined many of them, took cards, solicited people, particularly Federation. I used to, you know, solicit like everybody else on Super Sunday or any day, and I was active in a lot of things, and I did get on some boards, and today I'm on the board of the American Jewish Committee, which I love. I think it's a fantastic organization, and I like it because there's a lot of young people involved that are very bright, and our meetings are interesting, and I've done a lot of things for Israel Bonds,
Jewish Historical Society.
Jewish Historical Society, photographed Stan Moretsky and other great people that I like this. And I did your wedding, right? Photographed your wedding, and
5 years ago.
And yeah, it was 5 years ago. So I really got involved. Wasn't just a photographer, and I think people appreciated that. They called me, kept calling me. They're still calling me, and I felt very close to all these organizations. But the one that we became the most active in, Shirley and I, Shirley has a Yiddish education, which I didn't have. But we wanted to send our children to the school that Shalom Aleichem had. So we both became very involved with Shalom Aleichem and worked on various committees. And I did become the president about 1970, I think. About 1970. I was the president for 7 years. And we innovated many, many things. And I'm very proud of that, the fact that we kept that organization going. It was, I followed Mike Zeltzer, who had been the president for 20 years. But Mike, as great as Mike is, Mike is absolutely wonderful. He pretty much ran Show 'em Like It. It was Mike and an administrator. When I came in, through my other photography of various organizations, I realized you need a board of directors, you need annual meetings, you have to give an award, and I instituted that. And that really saved the organization. It was, our school was failing, the school closed. We didn't have enough children, so we had a wonderful school of about 400 kids at one time, and a Yiddish school, but they taught Hebrew and Jewish history. And the school didn't exist, and the organization would have failed. But I think we brought it back to life. And I was the president, but Shirley really, I couldn't have done it without her. She was the one that helped me with almost everything. And it's a flourishing organization today, but with a small group of people, similar to Jewish Historical Society. There's a handful of people that do all the work, and that seems to be true. But I think my life has paralleled my photography and my organizational work. I think it was, I did both almost equally, and I think I've had a good life. I think it's been important to me.
Well, I've known you I met you back in the mid-'60s when I was the advertising manager of a company, and you did some advertising photography for me. And in fact, I tried to find that first ad that I first met you, and I couldn't find it in my scrapbook right away. But
yeah. And
I've followed your career and have seen your name 1,000 times over.
Yeah.
And, you've led a wonderful career in life.
Well, I just photographed a meeting at Walmart in Howell, Michigan. They had presidents of all their suppliers come. They had about 30 presidents or chairman of the board come to a Walmart. And Walmart is now their biggest supplier. I mean, they are the biggest supplier for Walmart. So they were invited, and they all came. And I was asked to be a photographer, photograph all these big shots. See, so when I was introduced as the photographer that's photographed all the presidents of the United States. And I said, yeah, Lincoln was my favorite, see. So that got a little laugh. But actually, I did photograph everybody from Eisenhower, except Nixon. For some reason, Nixon never came to Detroit. But when the presidents came here, early on it was always Labor Day when they would come, or fundraisers. Jimmy Carter came here. Somebody hired me to photograph him with people. I didn't know who Jimmy Carter was. I didn't even care. And he became a president. See? So, but these guys, they're all regular guys. Clinton was just a regular guy. You could call him Bill. When I was in a room with him, I called him Bill. As a matter of fact, I was at David Herman's house and for a fundraiser, and there was Bill Berman, who you probably either interviewed or will interview, Bill Davison and Bill Clinton. And they were kind of far apart. And I said, would you Bills kind of get together, get a little closer? They all giggled, and we got a good picture. And I should spend some time talking about David Herman, because there was nobody like David. Just so wonderful in the community. This community would not be where it is today without David Herman. Other men worked very hard, but always quietly. David was a master fundraiser. People didn't mind giving money. If David called, you doubled your pledge, and you didn't mind. And he did so many fantastic things. There was a period when I was probably at the Herman's house once a month, and it wasn't only Jewish event. It was everything. It was the symphony. It was Red Cross. It didn't matter what it was. David opened his house and called me as a photographer, and I did a lot of stuff. And David's one of my very special people in the world. And others that I'm sure the people you've interviewed, have you interviewed Max Fisher? Or you will? Huh? Max?
Will be, yes.
Yeah, you better, he's in his 90s. But now Max is a quiet man, but you're so impressed with him. And his gifts are so enormous. What's it, exceeded 35 million over the years, I think, something like that. And his daughter Jane has followed in his footsteps. She's fantastic. And being around those people has also been a big influence on me. because they're all so wonderful. I haven't met anybody in the Jewish community I didn't like. I was trying to think, was there anybody that was a son of a bitch? I don't think so. I think everybody was so dedicated to Jewish causes, Israel, of course. One I have to mention, two that really come to my mind, Paul Zuckerman and David Mondry. They were the heart and soul of Israel. They passed away. They just gave everything. You know, Israel was the #1 thing in their lives, and they worked so hard. And when you photograph people like that, something happens, and they're just so special, and you can't take a bad picture of them. No matter how you photograph them, they're so terrific that the photographs come out terrific. And I think that I was lucky that I photographed great people to make great photographs, you know. So, and there were a lot. I'm only naming just a couple, but there were many through the years, and many women. Today was a women's meeting for Israel Bonds. There were 50 women there, I knew almost all of them. They're all active. They work in everything. They work on the Balfour concert. They work at the Holocaust Memorial. Certain people work on everything, and I know you know these people too. They're just so involved. Judy Cantor, who's a past president, you know, of the Historical Society, was there, and she's going to head up the 350th anniversary of Jews in America, and she got her start, I think, with Jewish Historical Society.
Absolutely.
And many others at the Historical Society that you could name that were influenced to me, mostly females. And the husbands always went along, or if it was a man, the wife went along. I mean, this community has been family-oriented, and now it's wonderful to see second generation, third generation, maybe fourth generation of people that are still involved. And of course, you know that Shirley and I are so proud of Dorothy, our daughter-in-law, who's the chief financial officer of Federation. To me, that's incredible that she would do that and become so important. And everybody that I meet tells me what a good job Dorothy's doing, that how wonderful she is. Okay, let's take a little break. Want to check something?
Yeah, go on. Say about your digital photography.
Well, now I was a film photographer for many, many years. And you have to really concentrate when you're a film photographer, just like our video photographer. You have to be aware that you loaded the camera right, you know, that the film went through. You have to worry about getting it developed. Well, digital, that's all gone. I mean, you put a card in there, you can take 1,000 pictures without changing film. You can check the back of the camera, the pictures are there. And Canon just announced the camera, which has a little radio transmitter in the camera. As you take pictures, it will automatically download the photographs into a computer, and if you have a printer, you can be printing them out as you're taking them. That's just announced. It's a little expensive. You have to want to be doing that. But now, for a couple of years, I do the auto show. I do Ford of Europe. They get the pictures in Europe before they wake up, because I go to the auto show before it opens, like 8 o'clock in the morning. I do the Ford exhibits digitally, put it on a computer, email it to London, and they get the pictures before they wake up.
That's amazing.
You know, before you had developed the film, it took a day or two. You had to mail them, maybe FedEx Express them. And now I did a lot of assignments for Life magazine, and on a number of assignments, they would have an airplane waiting for me because of deadline restraints. They would have an airplane waiting for me, take the pictures and run to the airplane in a cab or something, give them the film, and they would fly it to New York to develop it. Now you can transmit it as you go. So, and I would say half of my jobs I'm not making any pictures. I burn a CD on my computer, and I hand them a CD, or I can do it at a lab. And I recently had a job where they wanted 9 CDs. I took my grandson, and he sat at the computer and burned 9 CDs, and we gave everybody in the family, it was a 90th birthday party, everybody in the family got a CD of everything I took. about maybe 150, 200 pictures. And that never happened.
Oh, it's amazing, Bob. You
Yeah.
started out when cameras had a plate in the back.
Oh,
of
yeah.
them. Well, you also had paper,
Right.
the paper film, but
You
and then you went
actually had to
through that
load
with-
the plate. You had to load the plate.
Right. Then you went through the 35 millimeter
Right.
revolution,
Right.
and now into the digital revolution.
Digital. What's next? I don't know.
I can't even begin to guess.
Yeah.
Um,
And I remember movie cameras where you had to crank it.
Yes. Well, I have an antique camera collection, so I
Have you? You know about
seen
that.
some of these, really old
Yeah.
ones and whatnot, and then
Yeah.
all the way on up to.
Yeah.
what
Well,
we're
my
doing now.
closest friend, who's my fraternity brother, is Sid Siegel, and he was with CBS for more than 25 years, and he was like the first news cameraman in Detroit. They brought a guy in from Cleveland when the television first started to do local TV news, and Sid was a photographer, and from childhood, I think. Very early on, he had a little movie camera, made little home movies, and he was the first one at CBS, at Channel 2. And he's retired from there now, but we're still good friends, and we talk about how cameras have changed. The movie camera, he had to develop the film. He had a big processor, probably fit in this room, to develop the movie film. Now, sits on a little card. See.
So, live coverage then and live coverage today are
Yeah.
quite different.
Some of the highlights in my career were groundbreaking, and I photographed almost every building built in the Jewish community in Detroit. I was the photographer at the groundbreaking, and somehow or other, those are really important to me because this was a structure. It wasn't just a meeting where somebody gave money, but like Sinai Hospital was such a great event. And when I found out why they were building Sinai Hospital and the fact that Jewish doctors could not practice at Harper and the other hospitals downtown, they restricted how many Jewish doctors. They had to build a Jewish hospital so Jewish doctors could practice. That blew me away. I said, this is America, 1955 or whenever it was. And Sinai was great. Both our boys were born there. And we're still friends with some of those doctors.
What are your sons' names?
Mark and Edward. Mark is married to Dorothy, who's the chief financial officer. I got to get some water. I'm getting dry here. Excuse me. No, we can talk about the kids.
Yeah. Your son, Mark, who
Yeah, I'll tell you about Mark. Mark was the firstborn. We had a nice little house in Oak Park. It cost $13,990. Paid. Well, there's a cute story about the house too. Shirley and I lived in an apartment building on Coolidge and 8 Mile Road, Blackstone Manor.
Blackstone Manor, yes.
Blackstone Manor, and Shirley would sing, and we had a second floor apartment, and she would practice because she's an opera singer, and the neighbor downstairs didn't like it, so we figured we have to move. We got to get our own house. We didn't have any money. But we had a friend, Red Gales. Remember Red Gales? He's passed away, but he was very active in the community also. So Red said, yeah, we'll move too. Find a house. So new houses were going up in Oak Park. They were $13,990, and you needed $1,000 down, but you also needed $1,000 in the bank. So Red said, hey, I'll give you all my money. You put it in your bank account. It shows that you got a bank account. We had the $1,000 for a deposit, and the payments were $80 a month. But we had to have a bank account of $1,000. We didn't have that. So Red gave us his money, and then we showed him the bank book, $1,000, so we got the house, and then we gave our money to him so he would have $1,000 in his bed. And then we were neighbors for a long time, and then we each moved away. See, and we were good friends.
What street were you on in Oak Park?
We were on Whitmore.
Okay.
What was the number?
21875.
21875 Whitmore, south of 9 Mile. A cute little house. We were very happy there. 19 and a half years. And then I went nuts and moved out to West Bloomfield and spent a lot of money. But we're happy there too. We're there 33 years.
And your other son then? And Mark is
Yeah, Mark went to business school, at Michigan. Both boys went to Roper 14 years. That's where our money went. We put 2 boys through Roper. Each one was there 14 years. And they were both very bright. When Mark graduated, he went to U of M undergrad and he went to business school, and that's where he met Dorothy. And then after he graduated, he felt he should be a lawyer, so he went to law school at Wayne. Eddie also graduated from Roper, went to Michigan, and Michigan law. He didn't know what to do, and his brother said, "Oh, go to law school. You'll get a good education." And he got a very high score on the LSAT, and he went to Michigan law. And interestingly enough, they both went to Chicago to practice. When Mark and Dorothy got married, they went to Chicago, and they lived there. And Mark was in real estate. Dorothy was an accountant, a CPA. And when the baby was born, we talked them into coming back. There were some other factors, but they did move back. They came here, lived in an apartment, and then they got a nice little house in Huntington Woods where Dorothy grew up. She would only consider Huntington Woods. She felt that's the way a family has to live. And they had this nice little boy. And Mark is working in real estate as an attorney. And then their second child, well, Jordan is now 16, and then they have a daughter, Dana, who will be bat mitzvah this November. She's 12, will be 13. And Eddie practiced law in Chicago at a very prestigious law firm, more than 100 years old. He worked there for about 4 years. But all the time, Eddie was a very fine musician, got it from his mother, obviously, was an oboist, and he liked to conduct. He was conducting, at 10, 12 years, he had little orchestras that he conducted. So he played music and conducted music the entire time. After 4 years at law, he really felt he wanted to pursue music, that this is what he really wanted. Decided to go to Northwestern University, and he got a master's degree in oboe performance and conducting. And all the time in Chicago, he was conducting a couple of orchestras. Wow. An opening appeared at a university in Illinois, at the University of Southern Illinois in Carbondale, as an instructor in oboe and the conductor of the student orchestra. And he decided to take that job. He left the job paying a great deal of money for about $30,000 a year, but that's what he wanted. He really wanted music, and he's progressed there. Now he's a full professor, and he married a girl from that area, Kara, who's a pianist, a very fine pianist, and now they have a little girl who's a little more than 2 years old. Her name is Gabriella. She's the apple of our eye, along with Dana and Jordan, the other grandchildren. Anybody that doesn't want to get married, marriage is not so hot, and children are not so hot, but grandchildren are phenomenal. These grandchildren are the best.
I've got 4 coming in a couple of months.
Oh, have you 4 at once?
Pretty close.
Everybody I know loves their grandchildren more than their kids. Because naturally we love our children too. And we're glad that they're successful and happy and doing things that they want to do.
Well, I think it's interesting how the arts have been such a big part of your life.
Arts are a big part.
Your whole profession is really an art profession.
And we've worked together. I do Shirley's headshots that she uses for her plays. I photograph the plays that she's in, the operas she's been in. I'm currently doing all the photography the last 2 years at Jet, all the plays. I like doing that. And
you do Michigan Opera Theater also?
I did 2 operas that Shirley was in. They have a regular photographer, but I asked if I could photograph the ones that Shirley was in. She did My Fair Lady at the Fisher, and she did, what was the name of it, Shirley?
Follies.
Oh, Follies, also at the Fisher. Fantastic show. Anybody that missed Follies, everybody knows My Fair Lady. They don't know Follies, and Follies is a wonderful show. And in Follies, Shirley's role was of an old opera singer. It takes place in a theater that's about to be torn down, and they bring back some of the actors, and it's written so that the older performers have a ghost image of themselves as young. So you have another actor standing next to you who's a younger person. And if you ever get the chance to see Folly, see it. I think it's one of the best written plays that I've ever seen. There are a lot of wonderful plays, but this is so clever. And Shirley was in that, got very good notices, and she's had the Best Actress Award, Best Supporting Actress Award from the Free Press. And we have a lot of friends in the theater world. I used to have more photography friends, and we had a wonderful organization called IPAM, which was Industrial Photographers of Michigan, and it was mostly the photographers that worked for large corporations, Edison, Ford, General Motors, and we had wonderful meetings. We have 200-300 guys come to the meetings. There were only a couple of guys like myself who had small studios. These were mostly corporate photographers. So we had the money to bring in the top photographers. We had wonderful, wonderful meetings, a lot of camaraderie. We had a dinner in December with our wives, which was always a nice event. But that doesn't exist anymore. Photographers don't seem to talk like they used to. I don't really communicate with many other photographers unless I see them on an assignment, and then you're busy, and you can't really say more than hello. And now they're all younger than me. I was the youngest. I was a kid when I started. Now I'm the oldest. So, you know, that's what happens. But I should tell you about probably my greatest assignment of all was the fact that I spent 1 week in Jackson Prison. When I went to New York, I went up to a magazine called Coronet. It was a small magazine about the size of TV Guide. And I said, you know, I'm in Michigan. Why don't I take some pictures for you for Coronet? About a week later, I get a call, and it says, how would you like to go to Jackson Prison and photograph prisoners from the inside, and we don't want to block out their face. You have to get permission from each guy to use this picture. I said, yeah, I can do that. Why not? Had no idea. I didn't even know where Jackson Prison was. I mean, I heard of it. So I called up the warden. I got through to the warden. I told him who I am, Bob Benyas. I'm a photographer for Coronet, and I want to come and I want to photograph prisoners, but I got to get permission. They got to sign a release that I can use their picture. Is that okay? And the warden's answer was obscenities, which I won't repeat, but in a way he told me to go ahead. You could come. So I went up to Jackson, and I was ushered into the warden's room and had a couple cameras around my neck, I think a couple Leicas. And he said, yeah, go anywhere you want. This place is yours. Be my guest. And he gave me a trustee to go with me. So I said to the trustee, what do you, you're a nice guy. What are you in here for? He says, murder. So.
What year was this?
This was early. This was 1950.
Okay.
Going back, 1950, right after I came back from New York. And it was like my first big assignment. And I did an absolutely terrible thing that you should never do, but turned out to be the best thing I could possibly do. When he was taking me around the prison, he took me to a balcony, and there's this big yard, like almost bigger than you could see. Guys are filled with the yard. And there's a line. I said, what are they doing in line? Because I'm very naive. I was 28 years old. And no, I was 26 years old. He said, oh, that's a chow line. They're getting chow. Well, I'd been in the Army. I know what a chow line is. I'll go. I'll get in the chow line. Well, there's no guards in the yard. They're all prisoners, see? So he says, yeah, go ahead. So I went down a ladder, and I get in line. And the guy said, yeah, come on, get in line. You're okay. Somehow or other, they knew that I was going to be photographing from the prisoner's point of view. And nobody bothered me. One guy once said, I'm going to take your cameras and break them over your head. And the other guy stopped him. And I was so young, and I'm a photographer, I didn't do anything. But after that, because I ate their food, I went in there, and it's terrible. You get a metal tray with a spoon and like slop. And you got to eat that stuff. One piece of bread, and you can't talk. There's no talking. So I did eat the food, and then I took some pictures. And after that, I went everywhere in the prison, and I had carte blanche. Nobody bothered me. They'd sign my releases because they figured I'm going to tell a story of a prisoner from their point of view, and it ran in the magazine 16 pages. So right off the bat, I had a couple things in life, but when you get 16 pages as a young photographer in a magazine, that's in a byline. Photos. It's Robert Benyas then. I'm now Bob, and I still have that magazine. I should have brought one to show you. So that was kind of an important step for me, and I got a lot of other assignments after that. And then there's one other thing that I should tell you about that I think comes to my mind at this same period of time. Through Shirley, because she's involved in music, we met some musicians who were with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. And the Detroit Symphony Orchestra in those days were defunct. They had no money. But there was a wonderful man who was a violist, Walter Poole was his name, and he decided to form called a Little Symphony, and he would be the conductor. So these were symphony musicians, and they were getting paid like $5 a performance, wherever they could perform.
In the 50s.
In the 50s, $5 a performance. And they wanted to perform, and one guy, Felix Resnick, is still playing with the orchestra. But we formed very good friends. And Life magazine had a contest for young photographers. You couldn't be 30. And I decided to photograph the Little Symphony and submit it to this contest. The only contest I ever entered, because I don't believe in contests. But I got an honorable mention. And that helped my career. But everybody was so wonderful to these guys. There was, should I tell them about Danable Hall? There was no place to rehearse. They would rehearse in basements. They would rehearse in churches. But there was a wonderful couple that had a house, in Detroit, not far from downtown. I forget exactly where it was. And they were from Denmark. And they wanted to teach ballroom dancing the way it was done in Denmark. You know, white gloves and very important. And they actually built, he was a carpenter, he built an addition to his house so they could have a ballroom. It wasn't that big. Let me say it was, I don't know, 30 by 40 maybe. And they allowed the Detroit Symphony to rehearse there. And they would dress up. They would wear black tie, a white tie and tails to listen to the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. That's the kind of people they were. And I photographed them. I did a story on them later on with their dancing school. But most of my pictures were taken in Danable Hall that I did for the Life story. And then after that, of course, the Detroit Symphony luckily did come back to life. And we now have a wonderful symphony with a wonderful conductor. But it was tough times. It was, people don't realize it. These marvelous musicians, and some were, well, you're bringing back memories to me. One guy was named as a communist by the House Un-American Activities Committee. Now, we have no idea if he had any connection with communism at all. But he was named, and he was released from the symphony. This was before the Little Symphony. This was when there was a Detroit Symphony Orchestra. They fired him on the spot, and his name was in the Detroit Times as a communist. And we found out later that he was like selling pots and pans door to door to make a living. And this was a nice guy. He never said anything to us about any kind of communism or anything like that. But if you recall it, House Un-American Activities, it was a terrible, terrible time. You could lose your job in a minute if somebody just said you were communist. There was no proof. It was McCarthy era. It was a terrible, terrible time. So I do remember this guy lost his job. We were all shocked. But
I'm very fond of the symphony, and I was
right.
involved sort of peripherally with reclaiming Orchestra Hall.
Yeah, sure. No, it's very important to Detroit to have the symphony. And our friend Felix, I think he's the oldest performing member of any orchestra. I think 55 years he's played with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, going back to the middle 40s. And he still plays, and he's about 86, 87. He can fiddle away. He's great.
He's involved with the Birmingham Bloomfield.
Right, he's the conductor of the Birmingham Bloomfield, and interestingly enough, he lives across the street from Mark and Dorothy, our children. He lives right across the street. So I go and visit Felix, go over to see him when I'm at Mark's house, and we have nice conversations. And now that my son is a conductor, they talk too. So it's kind of a interesting thing. But I've had a good career and had very few bad moments. I don't really remember any. There were some tough times financially, but everybody had those. Well, we had a good life, a good career, and met wonderful people.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
I have a brother and a sister. My sister lives in Florida. My brother is here. We're very close. Unfortunately, my sister lives far away. My brother was never involved in any activity, and I took him with me on some of the big events. I would actually, come on, Don, come on with me. Somehow or other, wasn't what he wanted to do. My sister, I think, is involved with some things in Florida, but I'm not real sure about that.
How did your parents get you involved with your, or does it just?
I don't think my parents were that involved. My dad worked very hard. You know, there was no money in the 20s and 30s. My dad worked very hard. Mother was a housewife. Before my mother was married, she was a secretary at Shard Tzedek to Rabbi Hirschman. So that's another connection. The Shard Tzedek is one of the pillars of the Metropolitan Detroit. A lot of wonderful people came out and still are coming out of Shard Tzedek and Bethel, and and I hobnob with all these people, and I don't think any more of them than I do of you, Stan.
Yeah, well, that's why I started out with talking about that fly on the wall thing that you've seen. Oh, okay, we're going to change tapes.
Okay.
Shirley mentioned about you were the first couple to be married.
At Temple Israel. Yeah. Well, Shirley, my family were members of Temple Israel. They were founding members. I went to high school at Bethel, and the family went with Rabbi Fromm to Temple Israel. So my family was members, but Shirley was a soloist at Temple Israel. And when we decided to get married, it was March 18th of 1951. Temple Israel was only partially built. There was no sanctuary. There was a hall, and I think we were the very first wedding. There might have been some before that where they got married at the DIA, where for a number of years Temple Israel had their services at the DIA.
I was not aware of that.
Yeah, for years, and. When they moved into this building, now I think we were the first, but I'm not sure about that. We were certainly one of the first at Temple Israel, and we were very fond of Rabbi Fromm and the cantor Tolman. And later on, we were friends of the other rabbis, particularly Monty Syme. We thought was an absolutely wonderful man. I'm really talking my throat out here.
Oh, you're doing a wonderful job.
Well, yeah.
I have one question I want to ask you.
Sure.
Back the first time you picked up a camera, you were a youngster, you just kind of got started.
Probably a $10 camera, but it came out. I didn't know what to do.
How old were you? You think?
Oh, I remember I was at Durfee Elementary, Durfee Intermediate School, and a friend of mine who I'm still friends with, Irv Stolman, had a dark room. And he said, come on over, I'll show you how to make pictures. And we had little trays, in the film, when you went up and down with the film to develop it. He showed me how to do that. So I went and got a camera. I don't know, somebody gave it to me, or I bought it for $10, whatever it was. And right away, I started taking pictures of my brother and my sister and some of the neighbor kids. And I needed money to buy more film and paper, so I would sell them for a quarter or dime, whatever I could get for my pictures. So I felt I'm a professional from the age of probably intermediate school, 13, 14, something like that. And I never stopped.
That's a very
Had a job today, got a job tonight. Long career.
Oh, absolutely. your former partner, Jack Kaufman, is he still in photography too?
Yeah, I think he is. Jack and I did pretty much different photography. I was really only a photojournalist and stuck with that. Jack was more of a studio photographer and did a lot of very delicate things that were difficult to do, such as jewelry or food. We'll tell them the story of the strawberry shortcake. There was an ad that Wrigley Market was running, and what they wanted was a box of strawberries and the strawberries falling down onto a strawberry shortcake. So how do you do that? See, now this is, we were in the old studio, weren't we, Shirley? Or the new, anyway, it was the 60s or 70s. And Shirley made the strawberry shortcake. She didn't want to make a big one, so we got toy tins little children would play with to pretend cooking, and Shirley made the cake in these, so they were small. And then what we did, we photographed the boxes. Jack did this, but we were both helpers. Shirley and I were both his helper. The strawberries were coming out of the box. We did that as one picture. And then we shot straight down on a bunch of strawberries falling down, and then we did the 3 shots of the strawberry shortcake. This is before computers, see, and an artist had to put those together, and it ran a full page in one of the papers, maybe both papers, and it looked like a box of strawberries with the strawberries falling down onto the cake, and everybody liked that shot. So, but Jack did that kind of work. He was willing to I didn't have the patience to like a necklace, turn every little stone to the right direction, and so we were good partners for a long time, and we did fashion at the studio. We did a lot of food. We did a lot of catalogs, the Christmas type catalogs for Wrigley. Cunningham Drugstores was a big client of ours at one time, and I did a lot of car photography too.
You mentioned the tank before.
We never had to photograph a tank.
Oh.
We never had to photograph a tank, no, but we had the studio that would take, we had a big door that could open up so a tank could, well, wait a minute, now I'm going to tell you about the most important thing in our studio, and that is we photographed the model for the World Trade Center. Yamasaki designed the model for the World Trade Center. Our studio ceiling was 20 feet high, and the model of the World Trade Center was 16 feet high. So Yamasaki came to the studio with about 20 assistants and about 30 boxes of little things. And they assembled this in the studio. And it was a model of the riverfront of New York with the World Trade Center. And it was big. I said, how are you going to build that? I mean, it went almost to our ceiling. And then they had little mock-ups of other buildings that were 1/3 of the size, 1/4 of the size, 1/8 of the size, and they had the whole little waterfront, and we photographed that. And they brought in their own photographer, but he used our studio. And we were the assistants. And we rented our studio a number of times to other photographers who were our friends. We photographed some interesting things.
Book
so,
fair.
The what?
Book fair.
Yeah, I have to talk about book fair. Okay, the book fair. This will be my 53rd book fair. I was the first photographer. Irwin Shaw hired me. Yeah, it's too bad he's gone because, God, everybody loved that man, and he started book fair, and he asked me because I was a Federation photographer, and I did work for the Jewish Center. Come and photograph the first book fair, which was 3 days. And it was wonderful. And it was on, there was a little center on Dexter Davison. There was an interim center when they closed, before they built the
Northwest on Maple Drake, but also the Northwest.
No, before Maple Drake, long before Maple Drake. No, they had Curtis and Myers. Yeah, they were building Curtis and Myers. So there was a building that was abandoned that made into a center for like 2 years. And that's where the first book fair was. And then I have photographed almost every author for, this will be my 53rd year. I've only missed a couple, and I only missed them because I had another assignment, and I had to get another photographer to photograph that particular speaker. Luckily, I don't get sick in November, never had a cold, and we photographed so many fabulous people in book fair and spent time with them. And Many people from Israel, prime ministers came. And then I'm going to tell you about two people, then I think I'll conclude. About three very important people that we photographed. The first one was Eleanor Roosevelt, and Shirley went with me. And we were in a room with Eleanor Roosevelt, and you thought you were in a room with God. We were so impressed with this lady, and she was very gentle and very sweet. Later in her life, I don't remember the year, it was for Israel Bonds, and it was at Shar Tzedek. I do remember that. And we were in a room alone with Eleanor Roosevelt and have that picture. We also photographed, another one that came to mind is Simon Wiesenthal. He came to Book Fair, and I brought him home to our house for dinner. He came with us. I have a picture of him with our two boys. But the two people that impressed me most was Golda Meir. She came here. This was Federation meetings when they would come, and Moshe Dayan. And I have those pictures in my house, have blow-ups of both of them, because they had these great faces that any photographer would just dream over just looking at them, let alone photographing them, you know. And Golda Meir was so bright and so sharp. And they were asking her some pretty tough questions. And she answered them. She just blew them all away. And Moshe Dayan was kind of a glamour boy, and the women all loved this guy, you know, and they all wanted a picture with him. And there was one time, you know, he had one eye. He'd lost an eye. So I was taking his pictures, taking his photograph, and his eye was bothering him. So his security guard came over to me and said, "Don't take any more pictures. His eye is bothering him." And but the women were all, they want a picture with him, see? So I said, "Well, I'll take the pictures, but I got to take it from this side, so I don't want to hurt his eye. You know, I'll take it from the blind side, so that the good eye is okay. I don't want to hurt his eye." So I took a few like that, and he liked the women, so he would put his arm around them, and I'd get a picture. Then finally he said to me, "No more pictures. You don't take pictures." And I don't know why I had the guts, but I said, "You're not my general." And he looked at me and he says, "Go ahead, take the picture." So I finished. I got like every lady in the room a picture with Moshe Dayan. See, so I met a lot of these important people, but somehow or other they were like everybody else. You know, I was friends with the janitor at the center building, and he was as important to me as these other people. We're in a society today where we think that Hollywood stars are so great and they're wonderful, and they're really no different. They're not any smarter or better. Maybe they're a little better looking, I don't know, but they're not.
Let me ask you, the collection of all your photos, you've donated them to the
Well, all my negatives
Federation
it went to Federation Archives. My United Way, which I also did about 45 years, went to the Wayne University Archives. And of course, many of my national assignments went to Black Star. They have those negatives, and I'm still getting some royalties. Some of the pictures are sold over and over if it's a particular nature. I don't get a lot of money, but I do get a few checks now and then. My prison story sold for 40 years. I got a royalty check every 3 months for 40 years from one of the prison pictures that Black Star handled it. And they would send me a check. It wasn't a lot, but it was $100, $200. But it ended up being quite a bit of money if you think about 40 years of royalties. And everybody wanted those prisons. I was the only guy to go into prison. Now other photographers have gone into prisons and photographed people actually behind bars. And matter of fact, that's how I got the League of Catholic Women job. They were going to do a story on women in prison. And they said, "Oh yeah, there's a photographer that goes into prison." That was me. Get Bob, and he'll be the. And then I was a photographer for 10 years for the League of Catholic Women for their magazine until their magazine folded. And the prisoners were okay guys too. They weren't any different, and none of them were guilty. I talked to a lot of guys in prison. What'd you do? Nah, I didn't do anything. They just caught me. They caught you doing what? They also B&E, breaking and entering. They never admitted to anything, but the warden told me, "These are dangerous people. We got to keep them locked up." You know, but they were nice to me. They didn't bother me. Nobody bothered me. You know,
Well, I think Shirley made a very smart investment in you when she bought those pictures
Yeah, right.
of her headshot, because I think the couple bucks she invested in you, I think she's gotten back a millionfold. And,
Well,
it's just listening to you and your personality and how you've gotten along with people and how you've talked to, well, now that you're on the other side of the camera today, how you've gotten along, it certainly is very easy to see why you've been so successful.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Stan. Thank you, Stan. I appreciate what you've done, and our photographer's working so hard there.
Lauren's done a wonderful job.
He's doing a good
He's
job, and I think the archive is really important. I know who will see these pictures, but if you forget the past, you're destined to make the same mistakes, right?
Well, hopefully the people will see the. Yes, you're right on that point, 100%.
Yeah, right.
You as a photographer are more aware than most people what those photos will mean now and in 100 years from now.
Yeah.
The same with these, when your great-grandchildren and their grandchildren can see this tape and understand where their family came from. Yeah. That's the next reason we need a museum in this city, a Jewish museum.
Right, we do.
Yeah.
We also need a Jewish theater. The Jet is too small. We really need a decent theater because the Jet Theater is an important part of our community.
Sure.
And I'm also very proud of the. Well, I love Sinai Hospital, and now that's gone. That's a sad, sad thing. But I love the Holocaust Museum. It's not in the greatest place, but it's so important for the world to know what happened in World War II, and they're really doing a good job of educating. The docents are very dedicated, and I see this through the whole community. I see a lot of hard-working people. Now, why the world hates Jews, I have no idea. Because I have never met a bad person. Never met a bad person.
I'm amazed, Bob. In this community, the Detroit Symphony Orchestra would not exist if it were not for the Jewish community. The Detroit Institute of Arts.
Absolutely.
Detroit Historical Museum.
Right.
A good part
well,
of
we should talk about
University.
Leonard Simons, talking about the Historical Museum.
Yeah.
He started it. His daughter's carrying on. And so many things are started by Jews. At one time at the United Way, Max Fisher was the biggest individual giver. There were large corporate gifts, but he was the largest individual giver. And Max Fisher was the president chairman of the board of United Way, and I don't know if it would exist without what Max started.
Look at the Max today, or what Max Fisher's nephew, Stephen Ross, just did to the University of Michigan.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And his son-in-law Cummings will be honored at the Yeshiva dinner, and I'll be photographing that too in about a month. And all these organizations have grown through the generosity of the Detroit Jews. There's no community like it. That's what I'm told. People come from other states, other cities. They say there's nothing like Detroit.
And you, as I would call you the official photographer of the Jewish community of Detroit. I think that would be a very apropos title to you.
Well. Thank you. Thank you. It's something I enjoyed doing, and glad I did. Glad I was part of it.
Yeah, I'm glad you did our wedding 5 years ago because we cherish those. Are great photos, and I'll still have to try and find that one that you did for me as an advertising for a company back in the mid-'60s because I was in a costume wearing a horse's head.
Oh yeah, I think I remember that. Yeah.
That was quite a long time ago.
Also with the Ecumenical Institute.
Okay, yeah, we should spend some time on the ecumenical, because that is not a Jewish organization primarily, but Jews were very instrumental in starting it, and can't think of his.
Yeah. Okay.
Terrible. I can't think of his name. It started it. Oh, he passed away, but it'll come to me anyway. A Jewish man, Jim Lyons. Yeah, Jim Lyons was a reverend, and he wanted the outreach. He wanted to do more in the community to get people to like each other, because each little church wouldn't talk to any other church, and he didn't like that. And he found a man who passed away, I can't tell you his name, who said, "I'll give you $100,000 to start this ecumenical institute." And I had met Jim, and he called me. He said, "We're having a meeting. Would you come and take pictures?" So, and I've been taking their pictures ever since. It's not even, I don't think it's 10 years old, maybe 12 years old at the time. And since that time, we got a lot of wonderful people involved in the Ecumenical Institute. primarily to get people to talk together from not only Christians and Jews, but churches, two Lutheran churches that don't talk. Get them to talk to you. Dialogue. That was the whole thing. Jim Lyons was the spark plug of that. And since that time, another man, he passed away, unfortunately. Another man stepped in, David Blewett, and he's an incredible guy, and really tried very hard. There was a lot of animosity. People didn't want to get together. People were afraid they'd lose membership. If you belonged to a synagogue or a church and you joined something else, and there were dues, they figured they would lose their members. So a lot of people didn't want to join. Slowly, they realized that this was important, and they did join. And it's still a small organization, not as big as it should be, because I think it's very important. And I've been their photographer.
And also the Jewish Community Council?
Council, I didn't do a lot, but the council, of course, is very important. And we have wonderful leadership there, lay leadership as well as professional leadership. No, I'm friends of all the leaders, and I love them all. I think they're all terrific. They all work hard. I just had a little session at Bar Ilan. They're fantastic. They work so hard. And the professional people don't make a lot of money. They work very hard to get the community together. We have a marvelous community, maybe the best in the world. So we talk about the. Did I miss anybody?
Yeah, I don't know, Bob. You've been just such a great interviewee.
You got more time? There's one we should talk
Go
about.
ahead.
Well, we should talk about Sinai Hospital too.
Oh, yes.
We didn't talk about Sinai because I was at the beginning with Sinai with Dr. Priver. The first meeting they had in somebody's house, there were just a few men that got together and said, we got to build this Jewish hospital. Because Jewish doctors didn't have a place to practice. We did mention that earlier a little bit. But then Sinai grew to be just a wonderful, wonderful hospital. And our children were born there, which is important. And sadly enough, it doesn't exist anymore. But there were wonderful people there. And and I photographed like brick by brick of that hospital. I was their photographer for 10 years, and then they decided to hire a full-time photographer. I was a freelance. You know, I had my own studio, but I was always a freelance. I worked for everybody. Mm-hmm. And then Sinai had a very fine full-time photographer. They had a staff, I think, at one time. Did a lot of research photography. I was doing more public relations photography. But
then you were there with Leonard Simons and Shapiro and all these other.
Well, Dr. Priver was the Aronson, and yeah, Schwery. There were those names are still on all the plaques, and.
Tell them about the first heart operation that you photographed.
The what?
First heart operation that you photographed.
Oh yeah, that was at Harper. I had an assignment from a national magazine. They were going to do the first open heart surgery. That was early, 1951 or 52, and it was a child. It was a child that had a hole in the heart, and they were going to patch the hole from one ventricle to the other. And what was happening is, one side of the heart was becoming very small, and the other side was getting very big. And they knew if they patched it, the child would actually, the term they used was drown in their own blood. But there was no hope. This child would only live a matter of days. And I did it for a national medical magazine. I can't remember the name, but it was some national medical magazine. So I was scrubbed. Camera was wrapped in plastic with a little hole around the lens. And I was in there about 18 hours. And they were working on this child that long. They had the heart-lung machine was a motor they got from General Motors, and they put wires together, and it was very, very crude. But it was the first open heart surgery in the United States. And I saw the child. It was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and they told me ahead of time the child would not live, because as soon as they would patch it, the blood would rush to the smaller side, and the heart would burst. The child wouldn't live. But they were going to attempt it because the child would die anyway. And this team of doctors, and I was scrubbed. I had, goggles and hat, and completely, my camera was wrapped. And I was in there a long time. And the operation was over, and they did patch the heart, and it held. And they said, you know, you can go home. It's over. We just have to wait now. And I went. We didn't have a house then. We were staying at my mother-in-law's, and I went home, and I called the hospital, and the child had passed away, and I broke down. I wept like that. I never wept in my life, because it was a child, and I saw this child, and when she woke up, she gave a few cries. I was in there when they were taking her out of the anesthesia, and she did, and then it was a human being. When I saw her in surgery, this is the first time I'd ever been in surgery, it didn't mean much to me, because they were working in there, and everything was wrapped, and, you know, is that a child, you know? But when they closed her up, and she made a few cries, that was like more than I could handle. And I just broke down. Then I went home and I found out that they couldn't save her. But that was the beginning of open heart surgery. And now it's routine. Now, I never did another one like that. I did some other medical surgery, but nothing quite like that. And that was one of the outstanding things. I did it for a medical magazine, and that ran for 5 or 6 pages. First, it was at Harper Hospital, and the doctor, I can't think of his name right now, but he became world famous. I was in on a lot of firsts. I photographed Henry Ford II one time. I'll tell you kind of a cute story. And I called up and I said, I don't want a posed picture. They want a picture of Henry Ford, and they want a candid shot. So I was ushered into his office by a PR man, and he says, hey, he says, I hear you want a candid shot. I said, I would like a candid shot. He says, wait a minute. He calls over his secretary, and she sits on his lap. So he says, go ahead and take it. So I had 3 cameras loaded, because I didn't know how many shots they'd let me take. But I had 3 cameras loaded, 35 millimeters. I took 1 shot on 1 roll, and then he said, well, you better take something else. I said, okay, I think you're right. I better take something else. So I did 1 roll had 1 picture, and 2 cameras. He let me shoot the whole 2 rolls. Then we went to a car, and I took a picture of him by a car. And being a little bit of a devil, I sent the 1 roll in first to the editor. They had an airplane waiting for the film. They had to have it in New York. This picture of Henry Ford. Well, it wasn't very long. They called me up. What kind of a photographer are you? I can't use a picture of Henry Ford with a woman on his lap, and you only shot 1 frame. I said, just relax. I said, that went by the plane, but on UPS, I sent 2 more rolls of all kinds of shots, and it did run. They ran an ad. They ran some ad in the New York Times, full page of Henry Ford. I forget what it was about, but that's the only time I was a devil. Most of the time I was a nice guy, but I just felt that if he's a devil, I could be a devil.
You had 2 other firsts, one with the Metropolitan Opera and one with Leonard Bernstein.
Well, yeah. Yeah, this Shirley remembers more than I do. Well, Leonard Bernstein came here to, this goes back to the symphony. They were restructuring the Detroit Symphony, and they were going to have a program. It was the Bach Festival, wasn't it, Shirley? Yeah, they were going to do an all Bach program. They brought in young Leonard Bernstein to photograph the Detroit Symphony, which was now a full orchestra. They hired a lot of people, and they let me sit in the orchestra. I wore a tuxedo, and I had a camera. I was about the 3rd row behind a guy, and I'm taking pictures, see? And he's conducting, and it ran big, ran the New York Times. Had a big spread on Leonard Bernstein. And then I photographed, then the Metropolitan Opera, which came here every year, were...
It was the first year.
It was the first year in Detroit, but they were always on tour. They took like a train of props and sets, and the last stop was Detroit, and they were doing Carmen. Yeah, they were doing Carmen, which turned out to be my most famous opera, my favorite opera. Anyway, it was Risa Stevens. Who was the tenor, Shirley?
Richard Tucker.
Richard Tucker.
Mario Delmonico. Mario Sereni.
Yeah, Mario. Yeah, very important people. And I was in the wings. I shot in the wings. And I photographed for the New York Times because they were concluding their tour, and this is to announce the new season in New York. So it was an assignment out of the New York Times. You know, I had this agent in New York, and he got me all these great assignments from all over the world. But this was interesting because I was backstage at the Metropolitan Opera. I didn't go on stage. I was going to wear a uniform and be on stage, but they didn't want me to. Later on, I made my debut in opera with Shirley. That's another story that comes to my mind. As a matter of fact, it was the same opera. But I did photograph it from the wings, and I did have kind of an interesting experience that I'll quickly tell you about, and that is there was a very handsome, tall, distinguished-looking man in the wings with me. And I was photographing it from the wings. I didn't want to go in the orchestra, and I wanted to make it as real as I could. So I was in the wings, and I got some pretty good shots. But Risa Stevens, the soprano in those days, came off stage, and she walked right past us. And the man standing next to me says, "That's my wife." I said, "That's your wife?" She didn't even say hello to you. She says, and he told me, he says, "Yeah, but now she's not my wife. She's Carmen. She's in the role." So she didn't even recognize me. And that's the first time I kind of understood. Shirley was a singer, an opera singer, and so I knew a little bit about opera, but then I realized that when you're an actor or an opera singer and you're in a role, you're in the role. You're that person. You take on that persona. You're not a friend. See, so she didn't say hello to me. She didn't say hello to her husband. Now, I was going to tell you about another musical experience. About that was also for the New York Times. I was announcing the new season, so this was the opera. But that was because I liked opera, but I didn't know about opera till I met Shirley, who was an opera singer, and she introduced me to opera. And then I really loved it. I still love opera. And now my son is a conductor. My son is a professor of music, and he does conduct opera. So it's and he used his mother in a Beethoven Ninth. Yeah, Beethoven. He used his mother as a soprano in Beethoven Ninth, which was kind of a thrill.
It's easy to see where your children got the encouragement from.
Well, the other son doesn't like opera, doesn't like classical music. He likes jazz. He
Takes good pictures.
He likes jazz. He's a very fine photographer. My other Eddie, the younger son, is a professor of music. Loves opera. Loves classical music. Doesn't take very good pictures. So we're okay. We're okay.
Wonderful.
Yeah. All right. I think that.
I want to thank you so much.
Okay.
It's
My
just
pleasure.
Been
my pleasure.
Fabulous time with you.
Okay.
Listening to you
and I probably photograph everybody that you're going to interview too.
I would imagine that you have.
Because that was
because we've started all the leadership, the older leadership, and then we've got a list of a couple hundred people that eventually.
Well, do you have any more? Do you have something else coming to my mind? Do you have any more tape?
Yeah.
Let me tell you about Mr. Max Fisher. I photographed all the meetings at Max Fisher's house that they had, and that was the big Federation meeting. That's when they raised probably half of the goal, whatever year it was. So to be at Max's house was so special, and you can never say enough about Max, what Max has done to this community. And he was also very photogenic, and so was his wife. His wife was beautiful, Margie. And they were very hospitable, and we would go there once a year for this meeting, and that's when I think the minimum gift was like $100,000 on up. And Max always made a gift of $1 million, and there were a couple other people that came close to that. And the leadership of Detroit was there, and me. And my gift in those days was probably $500, or maybe a couple of years ago, $1,000 was my gift. But I was only invited as a photographer. But I was there, and those meetings were, Max was so inspiring, and this community would not be the same without Max and David Hermlin. I have to really talk about David Hermlin, because as wonderful as Max was, there was nobody like David. And there was a 2-year period when I was at David's house maybe once a month, 10 or 12 times a year, for all kind of different charitable events, and everybody gave to David. When David asked for a pledge, you pledged, and you pledged good. And without Max and David, and many other people that I could mention, it's just been a fantastic community to have these people. Let me mention one more guy who passed away too young, I think, and that's Paul Zuckerman, the meetings of Paul Zuckerman were after the Fisher meeting, so it was a step down from the very big givers. But Paul was so, Israel was in his blood, and this was, I'm talking about the early years of Israel, you know, during the war years. During the war years, when people gave 5 times, 10 times their normal gift to help Israel in the war. And Max was, Paul Zuckerman was the spark plug. There was always the Max Fisher meeting. People gave wonderful gifts. But Paul Zuckerman he was quite a guy. And to be at his house with his wife, who's still around, and his daughter, too, is very active, it was really special and influenced me. Those people were big influences in my life to participate, the importance of giving, and to know them, to know David Hermelin and Max Fisher. It's really special. More important than presidents. I photographed all the presidents. I said, they didn't impress me like these people, and the people that other people that you'll be photographing, men and women, fabulous women in this community. I don't want to mention any because I'll probably forget some names, but they were truly wonderful, wonderful people.
That's what I said. You've been that fly on the wall.
I was the fly on the wall.
You've seen these people. You know how they truly are. They've stopped to pose for you, to talk to you. I mean,
and I was a photojournalist early on. I told you about you know, that disaster in the mine when the photographer, you know, I said, how do you photograph these people crying, you know? And he taught me how to do that, to be involved and not be, and be invisible. And you know, we had all these parlor meetings. We had great meetings. We had wonderful black tie events. We had meetings at the Statler and the Book Cadillac. We don't have that anymore. I guess we can't afford those big dinner meetings. Everything now is done in the home. But they were fabulous, and those people worked so hard to help Israel, help local charities. We probably have the best local charities, you know. And you're right. I was there, and you're right. I was a fly on the wall. I tried not to disturb anybody. I worked with Leica cameras, which were very quiet. I even had I built a little muffle around them so that they wouldn't even make the click. You know, that we could be very quiet. And that was my technique. But now when I come in, they're glad to see me. Hey, Bob's here. You know, now we know we'll be recorded. I do a lot of stuff for the Jewish News now, and they want to be in the Jewish News.
yeah.
So that's
publicity stuff.
yeah, right. So that's you got me wrung out.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah.